All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with everything. Again, this is Richard Harris. I'm the Director of Sales Training and Consulting over at Sales Hacker. I am super excited to have a great group of speakers with us today. From Speakeasy, we have Lloyed Lobo. Lloyd has been engaged highly in the startup community for quite a bit now, and I know he's got a lot of interesting ideas and thoughts to share with everyone. We also have Hana, Abaza, and Hana, if I mispronounced her name, I apologize. She is the VP of Marketing over at Uberflip. And certainly last but not least, we have the CEO of Skaled, Jake Dunlap. I've gotten to know Jake quite a little bit this year, and they're doing some amazing things over there as well. Before we jump right into the questions in the panel discussion, I do want to let everybody know that we do want questions from the audience. We want you to please go into the chat box and post a question so that we can get some engagement coming from you. This is, we're certainly here to present a lot of thoughts. We've got some great thought leaders here, but it's really about the challenges everyone else on this phone call is really having. So we really want to make sure that we aren't trying to predict what everybody's challenges are. So please take advantage of that and ask us questions, and we will go ahead and get started from there. One of the first things that we, as we were putting this together with everyone, there's a challenge around this whole webinar and demo phase, and one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a little bit of a fear that everybody wants it all done in 30 minutes, right? Your SDR set up a meeting, it's a first call, and for whatever reason, either the assumption from the prospect is, well, I'm going to get my demo in 30 minutes, or sometimes the SDR, the AE has said it, or the company has said that this is how we're going to do our calls. But oftentimes that causes a lot of other challenges along the way. And so I'd love to hear from our panelists a little bit about how do you guys see that in your own space? Because it's hard to sell a $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a month SaaS solution in 30 minutes. I don't know anybody who spends that kind of money in 30 minutes. So I'll stop there and let someone answer.
So I'll jump in because I feel like we're all waiting for somebody else to jump in. I think, Richard, you sort of hit the nail on the head that depending on the type of solution that you're selling, a 30-minute sell isn't necessarily always realistic, right? Because for those of us that are catering to kind of that upper mid-market to enterprise sale, there's really a process that you have to go through. So the way we kind of think of it is there's kind of two phases, right? There is the phase of kind of getting your persona, your champion, the influencers, the decision makers on board and buying into the solution. And maybe that's possible in 30 minutes, right? But then there's that whole other aspect of the actual buying process, right? Is it going into procurement, for example, and sitting there for months at a time, unfortunately, in some cases? Mm-hmm. Are you going to be bumping up against any questions from legal? Are you going to be having to go through some sort of security review, depending on this type of company that you're actually doing this? So I think kind of framing it in the context of, what do we mean by making the sale on your first demo? Is it getting buy-in and pulling the trigger and getting sort of a verbal yes and moving to that next phase? I think that's definitely possible, but I think we also have to consider, the actual logistics of what happens at big companies when you're selling.
So from my side, I've been on the business founding team of 3 different companies and very distinct products, right? And what I found is that in that first meeting, whether it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whether it's an hour, if I can get to the right person, walk away with a good understanding of their pain points, and then position whatever we're offering in terms of them, I get the next meeting and normally leads to a close. In that, at Speakeasy, we have a 5-step sales process. At Bose is another company, software company, where we have a 3-step sales process. And the key to getting to that next meeting always is, do I have the decision maker? How do I nail it? How do I get a solid understanding of their problems and them iterating that, right? Is saying, this is what I face. This is the challenges. Yes, yes, yes. Getting them committing throughout and then showing them just enough to align with their problems.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think part of it too is maybe even just managing expectations. Knowing how your solution works. How do you properly manage the expectations? Obviously, it's fairly obvious. to some extent to try and figure out how to make sure the SDR communicates that and work with your SDR leader to make sure their SDR isn't over-promising a demo, right? But then also managing the expectations because, look, we all know that, if FedEx or UPS says they want a 30-minute demo on their first call, everybody in the company is going to know about it, and we're going to strategize around how to do that. But so I think there's a little bit of balance of managing the expectations. You guys, maybe at each of your organizations, focus on that.
Sure, I'll jump in then. So I think it's about the appropriate demo for and I'll just use that example, Richard. It's the appropriate type of demo for the appropriate audience, meaning in that first call, it may be a deck or a business walkthrough of how we work and support and help if it's VP at FedEx, or a more tactical demo if it's more of an end user, right? So I think it's about knowing your audience, and at the high level, they really don't care about your admin settings or alerts or any of those details. So it's about having those, Dave Govan calls it like level 1 and level 2 demos. So having that level 1 to really inspire, action for them to understand that yes, it's something that's going to drive business value, or having that level 2 demo, which is where, knowing our audience, we might want to go a little bit deeper in the product. So I think it's really knowing who you're meeting with and knowing what the outcome that you want from that first call is that helps you to know what's the right type of demo or demo or talk track, right? Where I think a talk track is fine for that decision maker that's kind of demo-esque, but it might not be fine for the end user.
Yeah, and I think that's the right question is how do you communicate that appropriately in your organizations to your prospects that, hey, this is our standard process. First, we want to have a 30-minute discovery call and then have a demo, right? Like that all first calls are not created equal, just like all demos are not created equal. Is that sort of what I think I'm hearing you say, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, we try. The key is whenever you use the word demo, it just has this connotation. I mean, all of you have probably been buyers as well too, of just this like, oh, like great, like I'm gonna have to sit through this this pitch, right? So I think like it's words. Whenever we try to avoid words like a discovery conversation, because then they think that they're gonna get nothing, right? And then or demo, they think they're gonna get sold. So we just literally the invite says initial discussion. Right, and so it's XYZ dash XYZ company initial discussion, and then that way I can take it whatever is appropriate, or teams can take it whatever it's appropriate. So I think I'm not a big fan of ever labeling it a demo because then you're setting a very set expectation. But I think that's how we think about it is making sure that like you already hit on this, making sure the SDR team is aligned, but then the sales team really views it as this kind of choose your own adventure based on like what's happening and who you have.
Yeah, I just to jump in there, I completely agree with sort of positioning it not necessarily as a demo, particularly that initial call. So I can't even tell you how much outbound sales outreach I get. I have a swipe file that I filter in my Gmail for all of the different sales emails. I think we've all seen them, right? I mean, subject line, should I stay or should I go? I think I have 27 follow-ups like that from a BDR. I should grab a screenshot and share it. But when I hear, let's book a discovery call, what I think is, okay, I'm going to get on a call and you're going to pepper me with a whole bunch of questions and not really give me any information, and you're going to be digging for information yourself. While that is definitely, I think, one of the goals of that discovery call is, to fish for a little bit of information around what the real value might be and what the use case might be, and is this the right person to be even talking to? I think it's important that it's positioned as a conversation, right? Not I'm going to ask you these 10 questions that our sales enablement person gave me because these are the things that we need to know. So positioning it as a conversation, I think throughout, whether it's a discovery call or a demo, is incredibly important to me when I'm actually getting pitched to.
Yeah, how do you do that, right? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So our process is when we do set up that first meeting, it actually says first name chat with the other first name speakeasy, and it's just that it's a conversation. And our SDRs are actually doing a lot of the discovery where they're trying to understand how are you doing things today, what is working, what is not, and what challenges are you facing. I mean, you've taken the first conversation with us. And so how can we pull out just enough information and then show you just enough of the product that you're like, I love it. I see this might work for our team, and I'd like to learn more. and then the AE comes on the learn more call, and the learn more call is, let's learn a little bit about your company's workflow, and let's see how this would fit within the organization. So the SDR is doing a little more discovery and the initial nuggets of the demo, and then that call ends up over to the AE. So by the time the AE gets it, it's the right person, 9 out of 10 times ahead of sales ops in the organization, and with the expectation that on this call, we're going to learn your organization's workflow and see how this fits within there.
That's great. I've got a comment on that, but I've got a couple of questions coming from the audience, which we appreciate. So, one of the questions was, what are your thoughts on calling it a walkthrough, right? So I'll let everybody answer that, calling it a walkthrough versus a demo or a deck or something.
I personally expect product. Yeah.
Same. I would expect demo. Like a walkthrough means you're going to walk me through the product.
Yeah. And if you don't, and that's what I'm expecting, I will be pissed.
Yeah, agreed. I think one thing that I was going to suggest too is that, and I having gotten to know all of you over the last couple of weeks and even longer, I know all of you have done a great job of understanding your ideal customer profile, right? Your ICP, and having that research ahead of time, and then teaching your SDRs helps them manage this. So when the SDR, the AE comes to that meeting, they should already know the pains of a lot of those people, right? I know, Hana, it's a little bit different for you because I think you guys are in a fairly disruptive niche, so they may not even know their pains. But I think there's some value to discussing, making sure you know what you're doing, right? What is your value prop? What kind of pains are you solving, and what does that provide to your prospect? And if you know those things, walking into this first meeting, I think will help. And do you guys sort of have all that outlined as best you can at this stage?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, it's funny. So the value prop in and of itself and the messaging is something that's constantly being iterated on because, and I think we all talked about this last time, it really does depend on sort of your model and the industry and the type of approach that you're creating, because there are technologies that are going to be out there that are going to be just brand new category creators, right, where people don't even really understand what this is or why they should use it. Eloqua did this for marketing automation way back when. What we're doing is similar, not in the context of, we're not creating the content marketing category, but we're trying to shift how people think of it, right? So for us, it's not a very transactional sale. It's not in an industry where it's like, it's a landing page builder and everybody knows what that is and it's very clear and easy and clear cut and we just have to prove that we're the best landing page builder, right? So it's a little bit different, I think, when you're in that scenario versus one where like the category is clearly understood and the competitors are very clearly defined. Your challenges there for messaging are very different. Your challenges there are, how do I differentiate from the competition? Whereas your challenges when you're sort of earlier on in that, that bell curve, you've got like early adopters, early majority. When you're really early on, your challenges are really more around like explaining why this even exists and the sort of utopia of what your life could be if you had this product versus how it is now. So that's sort of how we think about it. We have sort of our top line kind of value prop and messaging, and then we have offshoots of that for every sort of buyer persona or key decision maker around like what's important for them. So I think Jake was saying earlier, like you're going to cater it to who you're talking to, right? Like you're not going to talk to the VP marketing in our case, or the VP or the CMO about how easy it is to use and how much better it makes their marketing manager's life, because they don't care. They want to know what the ROI is. They want to know what the business value is. So that's sort of how we try and approach it.
Jake or Lloyd, anything to add?
No, I agree that you got to position your product and your offering based on who you're selling to, right? And when we sell to the user buyer, it's always the demo and how can this product save me time? And when we're selling to the head of sales ops, they want to know, how can I turn every rep into my top rep? What is the ROI for me? How is it going to help me with better forecasting? So it's completely different things.
Great. We've got another question from the audience, and Jake, maybe we'll let you start with this one. And it's a little bit of a question we talked about in our prep call, but I think it goes along the same lines from the audience, which is, how do you feel about an online overview? And I'm assuming that that's a little bit of something that someone looks at before the call to the woman who's asked this question. I think it's a great question. We had talked about it a little bit at a time of, well, what do you do before the call even occurs, right? So maybe you get that SDR, they send a meeting via an email, and that's it. How do you make the best use of that? Do you send resources ahead of time? Do you share a particular article? Do you have an online overview? Jake, how do you guys see that over at Skaled?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know we actually had a good conversation about this, I remember. I think a lot of this depends on the complexity of your product and the sales cycle. So I'm not going to try to cop out. I'll answer it directly. But it's if you have a very stupidly easy to understand and in a well-defined market, I think it's easier to be able to share things ahead of time or to have videos, etc. In, again, well-established market, fast sale, etc. I think if you have a more complex SaaS product that either requires detailed explanation in the beginning or detailed implementation, or there's kind of or other moving pieces or lots of people involved, I think it's really tough to tell that story, not over the phone or face-to-face. And so I think, I think my answer is it depends. If you have a complex product, then no. I'm a big fan of sending as absolute literal, nothing, if possible, to just get the meeting, because I want to be able to shape the education so then they understand, like, wow, to Hannah's point, like, I didn't think of this, like, having all of my content in one place was as important as now I do realize that it is. Whereas it's really difficult to think that the PowerPoint that went in their junk folder that they threw away or whatever is going to be able to tell that message. So I think it's fine in super low complexity, very streamlined, easy decision making, and I think it's the exact opposite when it's more complex or a less defined market.
I'm a little divided on that, because what I found, and this is something we test, is 70-80% of the time when we send information, the prospect doesn't even view it, and the dialogue starts like it's supposed to anyway. So I'm still testing that out. And then in some cases, 15-20% of the time, they're super engaged, they're knowledgeable, and they come into the call asking you what they want to learn. Hey, can you tell me about this, that, and the other thing? So it can help in situations, but sending as little, just enough information, right? You don't want to send them a Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that sending content can actually be like incredibly powerful, but I do think there's a dangerous sort of line that you can cross and really overwhelm people with stuff that's not relevant to them. And I think it also depends on how you've actually come to speak with the particular prospect. There's a huge difference interacting with somebody who requested a demo on your site versus an outbound outreach versus maybe somebody that's been, coming through like a marketing nurture that you're reaching out to, so they're not like totally outbound, but they're not totally inbound either. Those are, that's really sort of how we think of our, key scenarios, right? Is like we've got people coming in through demo requests that have explicitly asked for information. We've got outbound outreach, and we've got sort of those people that are in our database that have been nurtured that, look like they're actually kind of ripe for the picking, for lack of a better term. And how you interact with those people, I think, is very different. I think a very relevant piece of content can actually be really impactful, but it can't be too much content. Now, listen, the advantage we have is, we're selling to marketers, right? We're a marketing product. And the way we send the content is through our platform and our product, so it's also showing the product. So we kind of have a bit of a unique scenario, and we know people are looking at it because we have the metrics from Uberflip to tell us that. But the key there is like relevance, right? It's like any kind of content marketing, whether it's a sales rep sending content or whether it's a marketing team putting it on their blog. If it's not relevant, people aren't going to read it, right? So sending them something relevant and making sure you're explicit in what value they can get from it, I think could be really powerful.
Yeah, I want to sort of dig into this one a little bit more. The three of you are at organizations that are definitely not at what I would say the mature stage, but you're certainly out of maybe out of sort of this bootstrap early stage, right? You've been able to spend some time with your ICP. You've been able to refine your messaging a little bit more. And yes, Hannah, you nailed it. It's always being refined. What about some of those people who are listening who are, they're still at that 10 or 15 person company, right? They're still having to learn and test. And, Lloyd, you said this yourself, is we're still testing it, right? You're always testing it, right? I think you nailed it, is that, 70% isn't going to work, but the last 20 or 30%, I want that, because I want those people coming and asking questions. But, if you're a smaller org and you maybe don't have the depth of just, bandwidth, what was it like early on at Skaled? What was it like early on? How did you figure some of this stuff out?
I mean, early on for me is like everything ourselves, right? I mean, the good thing is when you're a small team and somebody from the founding team or early employees is doing selling and talking to customers and crafting this material, you can respond to customers and you can respond to the market quicker than sending it to a department and designers and so on. And we've seen this. I'll give you a recent example. We used to do just a demo, like post a discovery call, hop into a demo, and then we switch to a slide deck, a very small slide deck that introduces the company, introduces our current customers, talks about the investors, and goes through the different problems that similar companies faced. And through that, it ends up becoming a dialogue. Now these people are engaged, and I used to never believe in the power of like sending slides, but these folks are now engaged, and it's resonating, and they're sharing, yeah, we have similar problems, and that sets this stage for them saying yes, 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 and these are the problems we have, and it enabled us to frame the demo to them. And we used to never do that. We used to never do slides before. So some things, like when you test. It's all a relation. I view everything like dating, right? You're not going to ask somebody to marry you on the first date. It's just like that. You want to just have enough to keep the prospect interested, so they take the next meeting and the next meeting, and if you do that right, you will win the deal. And I found that 100% of the time.
I think that goes back to one of our first questions, which is just making sure you set the proper expectations of what the call is, right? The goal of just about every first call I know in a SaaS world and in a startup world is, let's have a conversation and see if we should have a second call, right? That's about it, unless you are truly a one-call close. But we've got a lot of questions coming in from the audience. I'm really excited, so I'm going to start asking some of these questions and see where we go with it. So if you're working in a nascent market creator scenario, do you think it's necessary to show the technology or solution during that first call to establish some level of credibility, right? And Lloyd, I think you talked a little bit about that, from just having a little bit of a deck. How do you get them to wet their whistle? Just get them, make them thirsty for more, right? The first one's always free, says the pusher, right?
You don't want to overwhelm people, right? You don't want to share so much information that they don't remember anything. Less is more. I'm a true believer in that. If your full demo takes 30 minutes, but on the first call, if you can show 5 minutes that the prospect's like, wow, this is exciting. I see how this is going to work within my team. Let's schedule the next demo. And the prospect's saying, the best outcome for us is on that call when we schedule the next meeting, and the prospect's like, yeah, I'm looking at my calendar, versus trying to get rid of you. That's an awesome outcome.
What and I'll turn this one, Hannah, I'll have you answer this, because I know we've talked about this. What's the best way to engage a passive client or prospect who's not providing a lot of feedback or comments during the demo, right, to ensure you're on the right track? How do we all have opinions on this one, but how do you get them to come out of their shell?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always a big believer in not being overly scripted, and really kind of trying to have a conversation like a human being, right? So I mean, I've sat in a lot of sales demos, and I've listened to our team sometimes when they're first starting off. It's like they do sound very scripted, and every now and then, you know, they'll interject. So does this make sense so far? But again, I think I can't remember. Maybe it was Jake that you said it, or somebody said it before. They're never going to say no. It doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. So
that's my biggest pet peeve.
But trying to keep it conversational and like peppering in questions that are maybe not, does this make sense? I think makes sense. But I think in general, I love Lloyd's point about, can you show them something that's like, you know, mind-blowing in the first 5 minutes? It's just going to really make their life easier. And that comes down to, do you really understand what it is that they need from your solution? And maybe that's hard in the first call. Maybe you need that first call to figure that out. But you know, as much as we like to structure these calls in a way where we're setting sort of our reps up for success, and we're going to set them up so that they have the highest possible close rate, in a lot of cases you need to adapt to the call and to who you're talking to. And you know, I'm the annoying person that will get on a discovery call sometime, and I'll be like, listen, I know your company, I know the product, I know I'm qualified, just show me a demo. Right? And I feel bad for the rep, but it's like, I don't have time, I don't want to book another call, I just want to see these 3 features that I know you have, right? So at the end of the day, they need to figure out how to deal with that. So there needs to be a certain amount of flexibility there.
Yeah, there's one thing, and I'll jump in real quick, and then I'll let the other guys answers. But one of the things I've been encouraging people that we've been training to stop saying, does that make sense, and asking a more open-ended question like, I want to pause here for a second. Is there a particular use case, or what use case are you imagining where you might find this useful? So now you're forcing them to engage, and you're not asking them, does that make sense, which is sort of that stale question that really means, yeah, I just need to take a breath. But Jake or Lloyd, if you have something to add, feel free to.
Yeah, the 2 things I was going to add is one, yeah, I mean, some of this is like sales psychology like if you've read any Zig Ziglar, I mean, old school Brian Tracy, like they're called pulse questions, which is, does that make sense? Is not a pulse question, like checking if you have a pulse, right? Checking if you have a pulse is like, how do you see yourself? It's called like putting them in the story, right? So you constantly want to be putting them in the story, and the word how can turn any question open-ended, right? So you want to make sure that they're really comprehending it, not just checking the bot, right? Not just going along with you. And to answer the question, the root of this question, which is like, can you just show them the demo? I think for early stage founders, like that's the number one fallacy. The number one fallacy is like, well, if I just show them the product, like it will sell itself. And I mean, like that would be great. It would be great if human beings were logical and like Hana, and I think I'm similar to Hana, and like I see it, I understand, I want to buy. But unfortunately, like you need to explain things, and I might not understand the use case for it. So I think for the early stage, I'm guessing it's probably an early stage founder that asked that question. No, you cannot just show the product and it will sell itself is the answer to that question. You have to do some of this discovery to do some amount of tailoring in every case. And then again, and make sure that they understand. Don't look to like force them to just get it because you're nervous or you don't want to answer the question. Like invite conversation. The goal of the first call is to qualify or disqualify, invite conversation, get them involved and bought in, but you can't just show it and hope that they buy.
That never works. I like the idea of how. So when we have this problem slide that rather than saying these are problems, we put it in the context of similar companies that have faced those problems. And we say, are these problems you face? And if not, what are some of the challenges along those lines? And recently I had this prospect who on each thing is like, no, we don't face any of these problems. So at the end of it, I'm like, why did you even take this meeting then if you had no problems? And I just paused, and without even saying I'm going to pause, I just paused. And it was an awkward silence, and then the person not only the person pour out, but they signed up like 10 reps to test it out the next day, right? So people have problems. Sometimes they don't want to admit it. Some people will relate to similar companies, and when you show graphics that these are the problems these companies face, and so on, but nothing sells itself, right? Unless it's a really simple product, easy plug-in, and you get it.
Yeah. One of the other question that's sort of coming up too is, we all talk about the 30-minute demo or the 30-minute call. Just out of curiosity for the three of you, if it's a legitimate first call, do you schedule 30 minutes or do you schedule an hour? Like, how do you guys handle that? And I think I know some of the answers, but I want y'all to answer from your own real-world scenarios. Lloyd, do you want to go first? Go for it.
Yeah, I never schedule anything more than 20, 30 minutes. And again, because my philosophy is we have a 5-step sales process. The first step is to get the prospect excited to take a deeper meeting. And that's been working. And what I found is that when it's longer, the prospect gets disengaged and then the next meeting gets pushed out. The worst outcome you want is like, send me some information, I'll share it with my team, and I'll get back to you on the next meeting. I don't want that. I want you to be, if it's 15 minutes, it's great. In 15 minutes, if I can nail down, these are my 3 problems, wow, this works for our team, when can I bring 2 more people from my team and learn more? That's the outcome, and let's put it in the calendar versus making this long first meeting. Also, I personally can sit through, I wouldn't be able to do a 1-hour-long presentation.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's the exact same feedback that we give, which is the 20 or 30-minute call, because the key is it's also, I think one thing we haven't talked about, the goal of the first call is also to disqualify, right? Like, yes. Disqualify is a perfectly acceptable outcome to a first call. And so I think if you set the expectation it's going to be a demo and then you have to go through this long thing and it's an hour long, like, you're just wasting your time. No company I know has even a 50 or 60 or 70% close ratio. So, by setting it a half hour, you can really, 20 minutes, you can really make sure you're going to spend your future time with the people that are actually going to close. So I just think 30 minutes is usually a good amount of time. But again, the caveat would be if it's a big enterprise sale, right? It's your first meeting and you have multiple stakeholders, then there are times when an hour might be more appropriate, but that hour is going to be monopolized by the discovery. Like, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about learning the business and talking about the business value as opposed to doing a demo. That's really like the only caveat I'd give would be like big enterprise meeting where the discovery process I know is going to be a beast.
I would add to that too when we're training people that if you get that call where all of a sudden it turns into 4 or 5 people, we often encourage either your SDR or your AE to have a pre-call with the person who's calling those other 4 people to that meeting, right? Because that person is now asking 4 or 5 other people to show up, and you don't want, that person's supposed to be your champion, right? So you want to say, hey, who's going to be in the room? Who's going to be, my negative Nancy, and who's going to be, positive Polly? Is if IT's involved, are they going to harp on us, or So I think there's a little bit of value to when you have those, the glory meetings, as I like to call them, on a first call, to do a little, do some homework, because and let the person you're working with know, like, hey, I want to make you look good. It's not so much about discovery. It's like you're asking 4 other people from your org to join in. I don't want them to come back going, you wasted our time with that. And most of the time you can usually get a pre-planning call even.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because that's something that I think is hugely underestimated, is sort of the ego side of things when you're really dealing with your champion, because you really need to set them up for success, right? And A, you don't want them to look stupid. B, you actually want them to be a rock star, right? Like, best outcome, they implement your solution, they get promoted. This is a great thing. Everybody's patting them on the back, right? So making sure from the initial call all the way through the sales process, making sure you're really setting them up so that they look really good the whole way. And there's a ton of ways you can do that. I mean, a pre-call is a great idea. We have this deck that we've created that's not Uberflip branded, but basically walks through all of the key sort of features and benefits, and builds out sort of a business case that we can customize for our champions, because a lot of times they have to go and they have to present this to their team, and they have to do like sort of an approval process. So how can we make that as easy as possible the entire way through? So I think that's actually a really important point and mindset to get into.
Jake or Lloyd, do you want to add to that at all? All right, we'll go forward with a couple other questions that are sort of coming through. and this is a really simple question, but I hear it all the time, is how often do you make sure that you send an agenda and it's the right agenda to send for that first meeting, right? Do you send it, like I teach this to SDRs all the time. Hey, put the agenda in the calendar invite, that's great, but let's remember that's going to disappear until 15 minutes before the meeting shows up. You then send an agenda ahead of time and sort of suggest, hey, here's what we'd like to cover in the call. That way people know, like, this is where we're going, right? They're not going to, even if you say, hey, I'd like to ask you a few questions, I want to answer your questions. Now you're at least knowing what you're walking into, and they're not feeling sort of, Hannah, as you said, just tell me everything I want to know. Or it would give Hannah the opportunity to say, hey, this is great, I don't want to do that part, just do this part. Do you guys all do that with your teams to set, a better outcome of those first meetings?
It's about setting expectations, right? And whether it's like a bulleted agenda or it's something very conversational, informal, saying, here are the 3 things we're going to discuss. Here's the outcome. Here's the goal of our first meeting. Here are the 3 things. Did you understand differently? It just sets the tone for the meeting and sets expectations. And I think that is really important, right? If you go, again, it's building a relationship. It doesn't end there. You want these customers to love your product, love you, and refer you, right? And what we find is that the 20-30% of our customers are coming as a result of referrals, and that's because provide awesome service and set expectations. If you don't tell somebody something and they're walking in expecting a full demo or something else, then it's just that's going to fail that meeting 100%.
Yeah.
So the next question coming in, and Jake or Hannah, if you guys want to jump in on this, since Lloyd did the last one, is, it's about building trust, right? Which is really what every discovery call, sales process is about, right? People buy from people they trust. We know that. What happens when your buyer, and maybe one of you have this challenge, is much more developer-centric, right? They have that technical mind, and they're the kind of people who need to kick the tires before they buy the solution, right? The question is, how can you skip this step of having them do the try before they buy or POC? But Jake, you're smiling, so I'll let you. You look like you're chomping at the bit.
No, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, those are like 2 very different questions. Meaning, should I do a POC and do I have a technical buyer? I don't know how they're related necessarily. I guess I could maybe see how they're related. But the one thing I'll say with the person is that usually the main thing to avoid is really like the best tip that I have is make sure that person is not in your larger meetings. Meaning what I see the technical person derail the sale is whenever you have a meeting and you have users, decision makers, and usually there's the tech person. And this is where setting the agenda really, really clearly in the beginning is absolutely critical to say, hey, great, so the goal for this meeting is we're going to do these 3 things. Then we're going to have a subsequent meeting to talk about technical integration, right? Is you want to try to silo out these technical stupid questions that are like so immaterial to how that they would actually use it into a different conversation. So for the technical buyer or the technical person, I usually want to separate them from the business people. Like I think that's my number one advice with that group in particular. That you have to basically put them in a little pod and not let them disrupt the business conversation. But the proof of concept is in any type of big enterprise deal, for the most part, and again, each product is a little bit different, there's going to be a proof of concept, even in like a mid-market deal, right, where very few people are going to go from zero to Lloyd's, from zero to marriage in one kind of fell swoop. So if you have a product that, again, is selling to larger enterprises, typically there's going to be some type of testing period. And so I think one of the most important things that you can do in the sale is embrace it. That for an enterprise deal, like where I see more and more mid-market and enterprise people lose deals, is they get this huge, massive whale who then says to them, hey, yeah, can you send me a proposal for all the users? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And then they come back and like, oh, it was too expensive, or they don't ever hear back. And it's like, of course they did. They've never even used your product, and now you pitched them that. Like, I think the proof of concept is actually a really valuable sales part of the process, especially in mid-market and enterprise deals. So again, I think they're 2 separate questions, but that is how I would answer them independently.
So I want to add to what Jake said. I think the days of selling top down and without building a good user experience is dying. We have this concept of product qualified leads. So what that means is, yeah, you'll generate leads from marketing and SDR and so on, but product qualified lead is, because our product is fairly self-service, the more somebody uses it, the more sticky it gets. They have a good experience, and their chances of buying are a lot higher. And I think especially for SaaS companies over time, this concept of product qualified lead gets more and more important, in that our people who buy our product, 9 out of 10 times the warmest leads are people who signed up and started trying from a self-service perspective. The same thing from a top-down perspective is if the sales ops leader buys into it and then gets some of the AEs to test it out, that is the best outcome for us. Once they're trying it and they're saving time and making money, that is going to close 100% of the time.
I think that's great. And I think, Hana, this question is going to be, I think this will be directed to you based on what I know about you, but everybody else can jump in too. How do you structure a demo for a product that's designed to streamline many processes in the business, right? But you're only addressing maybe one VP at the company who only cares about solving his or her problem, right? So you're a solution that cuts out 2 or 3 other solutions and can create a massive amount of efficiency and effectiveness, but they're drilled in on only their side of the house. What do you see in that in your space?
Yeah, that can be tricky if you're dealing with essentially different teams and departments and technology that's going to span across different teams and departments. I'm a sort of big fan of focus, right? And I do think you do need to find sort of that in or that wedge and then sort of start to expand from there. Because, listen, like this is, similar to a land and expand mentality, right? If you get in with sort of one department and there are solutions that you provide that can actually really help with efficiencies across the board, that's something you can start to work in once you've got your foot through the door. Particularly if you're dealing with enterprise, a lot of these guys have you have to be an approved vendor, and there's a process to that. And then once you've sort of gone through that and you're an approved vendor, then it's much easier to start to reach out to those teams. I would say start with a focus, and that's fine if it's one person on one team. Where's the most value? Where's the quickest, easiest way you can get into an organization and show impact, and then from there, what's the path to starting to spread from that one team to many others? Because the problem is, if you start talking about all of these benefits to all of these other teams, they don't give a shit, right? Like they don't care. They want to know how you're going to make their lives easier, their job better. They want to know how you're going to turn them into the top exec at the company with the highest numbers and the best ROI. That's what they want to know. So as soon as you start talking about other people and other people's problems, they're not going to care. So that's how I would approach it from a positioning standpoint. And I would also think about sort of stepping back and looking at the overall value prop of your company. Messaging is a really hard thing, and positioning is a really hard thing, and it's one of those things that's very misunderstood. And the problem is, if you get it wrong from the beginning, that screws up your entire sales process, right? And positioning is it's not a marketing thing, which is what a lot of people think. It's a company thing, right? It's something that's informed by sales, by customer success, by marketing, by the founders. And unfortunately, when most of us think of positioning, we think of those statements. We've all seen those positioning statements, right? It's like, we do this for this type of company, and you end up with this paragraph that's not English. Do you know what I mean? It's like this random sort of dump, and nobody really understands what it is. So getting that right off the bat, and also understanding that that's going to change over time. So we've all, again, seen that bell curve, right? Early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then you've got the laggards over here. You might have exactly the same product, but as you start to mature across that spectrum, your positioning and your language has to change, even though the product might be exactly the same. So I would say you need to get that right from the beginning, and then you need to figure out where to focus and focus on like where you can provide the most value.
Jake or Lloyd, anything to add? Or I think she nailed it, but anything you guys want to add?
She nailed it.
All right. Lloyd, I want to go back to you because you mentioned sort of this free trial thing. Did you sort of go through a phase? The question was, did you have to go through a phase of not wanting to do the free trial first and just trying to do the 1 or 2 call close? And then was it based on doing some free trials that you realized your close ratio would increase, right? How did you guys come with that? Or did you just sort of walk into this knowing, nope, we're always going to do a free trial because we know our hypothesis will be that more free trials will mean more people will close because they will have used it?
So I mean, it all depends on the kind of product, and every business when you're starting out, it's important to have that hypothesis. Ours was freemium, and then we eliminated freemium and moved to free trial. But I'm a product person at heart, and I strongly believe that if you have a product that's solving a big problem for your target audience, for your ICP, what's the harm in having them try it out? It's only going to get stickier, and that's what we've found in that the more they use it, they love it, and if they love it, they're going to buy it, and it expands. We've seen in large companies as well. It'll start with 1 or 2 people because they hate the current solution, and then it expands, and then individuals start buying it and expensing it, or it's an easier outcome to sell to the sales manager. So I like that. My other company, we sell top-down sales, and there's no trial. The trial is pay for the solution and use us, right? And it depends. It all depends on who you're selling to. So if you're selling to the C-suite of a large company, and they're not going to go through like this long, arduous trial process unless they, depending on their priority, right? So they might put together 1 or 2 people to vet it out and then roll it out to the rest of the team. And I've closed like $1 million deals without even having a product in place, just by nailing the problem and creating the ROI, and we'll build this over the next 6 months, versus something that's a very simple product that's easy to sign up and try. It all depends on what you're selling.
So you were able to sell sort of in the beta phase, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I have. So, about 5-6 years ago, we sold a $1 million deal for another company to Simon & Schuster before we even had the product. And their biggest issue was they had 2 warehouses, and we were selling a warehouse control system, and one of their warehouses was unionized, and these workers weren't working. And when the union showed up, they were pretending to pick and pack, and so we pitched them a system that would track everything and essentially workflow and tracking management that they paid for. They paid for a whole R&D, but at the end of the 10 months, we also got a cover story in the Material Handling magazine that Simon & Schuster saved $5 million in 10 months because they shut down a whole warehouse. So it all depends. You sell to the ROI. At Speakeasy, we're selling $20 to $50 subscriptions per seat, and it's all about the trial. Love the product, and you'll see the ROI immediately. Some people need longer to realize the ROI, and some people will take 14 days to 30 days to align on that ROI.
Great. That's awesome. I do want to, we got about 11 minutes left. There are 2 questions that I want to ask the group, and I know we've talked about. One is, and before we do that, but I want to tease the audience a little bit, is what's the difference between great demos and terrible demos? And then also very specifically, what are the things that you love in a great demo? But before we do that, I do want to give you each, the 30-second opportunity to tell people what you guys do. We're not here to pitch their product, but they've given their time, and I think they're all deserved of 30 seconds to tell you guys what they do. So we'll let ladies first. Hana, if you want to sort of just remind people what you do if they haven't heard of what you guys are doing yet.
Yeah, sure. So we really are all about helping marketers and, by virtue of that, the entire organization to create, manage, and optimize different content experiences across the buyer journey. So, I mean, a lot of us are in SaaS are very familiar with, content marketing being used at sort of the top of the funnel. But the reality is content can actually push people further down the funnel. It can be used actually for sales enablement really effectively if you can actually send them to an experience that's very tailored, very targeted. It can be used for account-based marketing and campaigns around target account lists very, very well. And then, of course, it can even be used for customer retention. So we're all about helping people kind of manage and optimize those experiences.
Cool. Thanks. Jake, you want to jump in?
Sure. So I'm the CEO of Skaled, and we work with growth stage and scaling companies, helping them to build out and optimize as pieces of their sales organizations. So what that means is we work with lots of exciting entrepreneurs and sales organizations that are going through different scaling challenges and are trying to think of, how do we implement best practices from all of the different amazing things that other people are doing. And so we partner with companies to help them through those various periods of scaling, whether it's the first stage of scaling and building out your first 10 or 15 sales person team through much more established companies that might have tens or hundreds of salespeople and are trying to modernize or optimize pieces of the puzzle.
Great. Lloyd.
So I would say we're a system for sales engagement. We'd like to be the stack for account executives, and what that means is really bringing together all the essential tools as an AE that you need to turn into a top rep or hit your quota faster.
Awesome. Hana, can you give me the name of your company? Someone missed the name of your company, so I want to make sure they get that.
Cool. It's Uberflip. And just as a caveat, Uber wasn't as big as it was when Uberflip was named. So throw that out there.
Fair enough.
Before Uber even came into existence.
Hey, there you go.
There you go. Awesome. So, I do want to, sort of flip it back to our Q&A bit, and what are the differences you've seen or experienced in great demos and terrible demos, right? It might be a good idea to maybe to start with the terrible stuff so that if people are doing it, they'll know to stop. and feel free to, let's not name names. Let's not bash other companies. But, what have you all seen? Lloyd, what have you ever seen that was just terrible in a demo?
And I would start by saying that I've done these things, right? You make mistakes and you learn it. I think the worst thing you can do in any sort of meeting is talk more than the opposite person, than your prospect or whatever. No one wants to listen to you. They want to talk. And people love talking, right? So if people love talking, and let them talk. 10, 15, 20% max. And that way you don't have to prepare as much. You just have to guide the conversation. So I think the meetings that go south are ones where the sales rep takes over and they're demoing you and sliding you to death, and the opposite person is like, how do I get out of this meeting? So that's my number one, just talk less.
I think that's going to be the universal one, right? Is the worst demos are, if you haven't taken a breath in a minute, like you should probably take a breath and ask a question. For us, it's whenever it feels like they're not listening to you. Like Hana mentioned it. The reason Hana kind of cuts to the chase, I would have loved to have had Hana on a demo. I think I could have diffused her a little bit, but I think that the funny part is that everyone understands they're supposed to do this idea of a discovery, and then they just go into autopilot on the demo. The demo is the exact same. There's nothing that's customized. So I think that it's whenever a rep, and we're talking about big companies. How about like the biggest SaaS company? I don't know if you've ever sat through the biggest SaaS company that you can imagine's demo, who I love, by the way. It is not great.
No.
No, it is really long and like too much and not tailored at all. So that to me is just like a good example of like you pause, ask the pulse questions, use the information from the discovery. But the biggest thing is breathe and ask questions and make sure you're making it relevant, right? Ask questions throughout to make sure that they're paying attention and you're not getting the, oh yeah, that's good. So breathe, ask questions.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think it just comes down to, are you listening and are you actually having like a a conversation like a human being, or are you reading a script and just trying to get through, your slides or your demo? One thing that happened to me recently, which it did get a little bit annoying, and I know if I hear our reps doing it, I'm always like zeroing in on that, is BDR, very young, very obvious he was new to the company, kept apologizing for asking more questions, and I mean, in this scenario, Jake, I honestly didn't have the heart to just cut him off and tell him to move on, but I think he must have apologized like 8 or 9 times in a 15-minute conversation. Don't do that. Like, be confident in your conversational skills. They're on the call because they want to learn something, right? So don't apologize for asking questions. That said, make sure you're listening and make sure you're having a conversation that's relevant to them.
Sure. Great. We'll add one more question coming from the audience too, which is, how do you guys value over the phone demos versus in-person demos? What is your litmus test for when you do one or the other?
Yeah, for us, what's the opportunity there, and does it make sense to actually do an in-person trip? I mean, we recently actually sent 3 people to Microsoft because you know what, it's Microsoft, right? And there was a huge opportunity there. So I think that's really just a matter of what's the potential for that deal.
I don't know if I have anything other than that to add. I mean, almost in 100% of cases, though, even if it was Microsoft, the first call would almost still always be a call, because you want to make sure that when you do get that in person, you have Lloyd's mentioned this a few times, that you have the right people to the table. There's nothing worse than, and I don't know how many in-person meetings everyone's been on, but I've been on a lot, and there's nothing worse when you get there and it's like just the one person. It's like, crap, like what a waste of time. So I think the key is, like, I like to do that first call phone, and then depending on the opportunity, second person, and the second one in person.
Yeah, and
so maybe knowing who you're. Go ahead, Hannah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking maybe what's helpful too. You talked, Jake, really succinctly about like separating the technical stuff from the actual decision makers, and that's something that, I mean, I know we wanted to get those calls out of the way first, and then we went and saw Microsoft, and they actually within 24 hours, the deal was closed. So of going to see them. So it's have all your ducks in a row and then go if the opportunity is big enough.
Yeah, I think too is that, if your audience has to be bigger than one in most cases to justify it. Now, for those of us who are in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, there's a little bit of a difference to that because maybe you feel like that presence is necessary. But again, to what Jake and Hannah are saying, that's what we've seen. There's one bad habit that I've seen on demos. One is that people will suggest they're doing a demo and they're actually just showing a deck. So please don't do that. That's not a demo. And then the worst thing is to just read what's on the screen, whether it's what's in the demo and you're like, oh, hey, look over here. Hey, look over here. And you're just sort of being Captain Obvious. Try not to be Captain Obvious and just read what's on the screen, whether it's a deck or a demo. So that's one really bad habit I've seen on a regular basis. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Real quick, what are the things that blow you away when you've seen a good demo, right? Or what are the things that you do that make your demos different than what you've experienced? How do what advice do you have for people on that?
I'll give my one pro tip quickly. So the key is put them in the story. So what I mean by that is, instead of saying you can do this, it's great, Richard. So when you're doing XYZ, you're going to be able to see XYZ. So make sure that you're putting them in the product, right? So every sentence is like, great. So when your marketing team is uploading content, they are going to be able to do it here. So you're using their name, using their company name, you're putting them in the demo. Put me in, help, and talk about the use cases that are important to me. That's, I think, it's more of like the psychology of the demo, but it's one of the most important pieces. Put them in the story. Help them to see how they're going to use it. Get them to mentally picture themselves in the product and using it.
Right.
Yeah, I love that one because what we do is after the first call, the next meeting we set up, because it's so simple, we try to get buy-in from the prospect to actually use the product. And because a big part of our offering is screen sharing, so we get them to screen share and then walk through their flows. And if you can get that prospect using it and loving it right away, and them taking over the demo, that's even better.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the only thing really to add is I find what's usually more effective is if you're selling the outcome, not like the nitty-gritty process, right? So if you can clearly articulate, to Jake's point, how I'm going to benefit and what I'm going to see and what my team is going to be able to do, and what the outcome is, I think that's probably the best way to approach it. And showing the outcome might be just speaking to it and pulling them into the story. But if you have examples and customers that are in the right industry, and here's the funny thing is, I mean, we try and do that as much as possible in terms of showing industry relevant. The technology is not different. Functionally, they're doing exactly the same thing, right? It doesn't really matter which customer I show you because it's the same. But again, there's that mindset of like, oh, this is a really relevant example to me. I can see how other people in the industry are taking advantage. So I think that's important.
Yeah, there's actually a great segue because I don't know if people know this, but when the Warriors were recruiting Kevin Durant, they actually created a VR headset and sent it to him, immersing him in the receipt of a championship ring with the Warriors in Oracle Arena. Like they sold the experience, right? And which is great too, because what that really means is that next week, Sales Hacker's doing a webinar on how to sell like a human. And that's, I think, what the three of you are all talking about. How do you sell like a human? How do you have a conversation? And so this will be next week on July 21st at 10. The following week, Sales Hacker's doing one on the 28th. That's how to build a sales and marketing powerhouse, right? Get them to get married. How do you get them to get along? So that'll be another fun one on July 28th. So feel free to check out the Sales Hacker website to register for those. In the meantime, I want to thank everybody, Hana and Lloyd and Jake. Awesome content, awesome feedback, and also to the audience, thank you for all the questions. We actually didn't get through all the questions we had planned because you guys were bringing so many questions to us, and I know there's a couple that we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. Hopefully we'll get those listed out and get an answer to the people who signed up. But again, thank you all, everybody. Really appreciate everyone's time, and hope everybody has a great rest of your month. And we're hitting the last 2 weeks, so it's time to move into closing mode. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.